Introduce you, Cynthia. It's my distinct honor to introduce you, Reverend Dr. Cynthia Huling Hummel. I first came across Dr. Huling Hummel when I was looking on the internet a couple years ago for something about stigma and dementia. And I came across your amazing presentation that you had done. And I was so moved by this, I thought I need to meet this woman and I need to get to know her better. And I say I've had the opportunity of speaking with you a few times over the last few months, and I was thrilled when you agreed to speak at our symposium. Just sad that we weren't able to meet in person. Next time. But both Sarah and I have had the opportunity of speaking with Cynthia over the last few months, and we've always come away and both said to one another how inspired we've been and moved by speaking with you, and I'm sure that's what all of you will feel today. Cynthia is a fierce Alzheimer's advocate and a voice for those living with the condition. As we've gotten to know about her, I've also learned that in addition to being a minister, the Reverend Doctor, she is also an artist, a singer, I think you're in the Hall of Fame, and a grandmother, of course. And I see her posts of her lovely granddaughter on Facebook. Aside from all of that, she serves as a national early stage advisor for the Alzheimer's Association, speaks nationally, locally about living with Alzheimer's disease, and had a presentation. Ginny, I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but had a presentation at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, a really amazing project that she's been involved in. She served on the National Council on Alzheimer's Research, Care and Services, and has also participated in the 2 national summits, of which I heard her speak this summer. So I could keep going on, but I think you'd rather hear from Cynthia than me. So Cynthia, thank you so much. I'm turning it over to you. Thrilled to have you and to hear you.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a joy and such a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm not seeing any faces, so I'm just looking at my slides. It's a little bit strange for me, but let's go forward. And please, Carol, if I'm going over, let me know. I sometimes have trouble keeping track of time. So again, it's just a great joy to be with you today. So I always like to start my presentations with a dedication to my parents, Claire and Bill Huling. My mom was a brilliant Renaissance woman, a high school librarian, a woman of great culture, and a wonderful mom and wife. My mom died with Alzheimer's disease in 2014. My dad, Bill, was her care partner for most of that time. And so I like to dedicate my presentations to both of my parents as they have inspired me in my own journey. So Alzheimer's disease is very personal to me. In this picture that you're seeing, there's the 4 generations. My mom kneeling across from me with my daughter, Emily, on her great-grandmother's lap. Emily is now 38 years old, or she'll be 38 in just a couple of weeks. But my grandmother, Emily's great-grandmother, my grandma Mimi, had some sort of dementia. My mom, as I said, died from Alzheimer's disease. I carry 2 copies of a gene they call ApoE4, which raises the risk of dementia. And so Alzheimer's is in my family. My uncle Austin died of Alzheimer's disease. Many families are dealing with Alzheimer's or related dementia. For me, it's, as I said, very personal. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. As Carol said, I'm a Presbyterian minister. I'm retired now, but I started noticing problems back in 2003. I was studying for my doctorate at McCormick Seminary. I was going for my doctorate in ministry. And I was at a church in upstate New York, the Lions Presbyterian Church, and I started noticing problems with my memory. By Wednesday, I couldn't remember what I had spoken about in church, what I'd preached on just days before. I was having problems recognizing some of the people in my church and remembering their names and forgetting about meetings. I moved to another church and my memory problems moved with me. And it was a very upsetting time for me because I'd always prided myself on my academics and my ability to navigate different situations. And I was just having such a difficult time. I basically keep a notebook and I write everything down. everything I do, and then I kind of check things off so that I know that I've completed them, because otherwise I won't have a memory of that. So I'd been to the doctor, been to several doctors, many doctors, as the doctors tried to figure out what was going on with my brain. There's a picture of a brain in the corner of the screen. I just knew that my brain wasn't working properly, but the doctors didn't know why. I had all kinds of tests. And the jury was out. You know, the doctors wondered if it could be menopause or it could have been an injury I'd had to my head. They just didn't really know. But I moved to a new parish, and my memory problems moved with me. And as I said, things came to a head one day when I was on my way to the cemetery. I was on my way to the cemetery to bury a woman who had passed away, and her family was waiting for me at the cemetery. And when I pulled out of my driveway and headed to the cemetery, which was just a few minutes from my house, I couldn't find the way to the cemetery. And I drove around in a panic, just a panic, because I didn't know how to get there. And of course, there was no one I could ask. I finally called a local florist and asked for help in getting to the cemetery. And needless to say, the family was upset, and the funeral director was upset, and I was upset. It was just a very upsetting situation that sent me for more testing. And I went for another round of neuropsychological testing. And during the exam, the doctor, after asking all the standard questions, asked me to name the books of the Bible. He said, you know, you're a pastor, you've got your doctorate in ministry, name the books of the Bible. And I didn't get too far. Genesis, Exodus. I couldn't get beyond Deuteronomy. And the tears were just rolling down my face. I was so defeated. It was just such an upsetting experience. My doctor said, you know, you've got amnestic mild cognitive impairment, and it's due to Alzheimer's disease. When we've looked at everything from your medical test to your family history, what's going on is due to Alzheimer's disease. And after chatting about my different options, he said, you know, things are only going to get worse, and it's time for you to retire, to leave full-time ministry, because you're not going to be able to keep up with all that you need to do. That's my friend Marion in the picture, and I just want to tell you about this picture because one of the things I did do that made me feel like I was fighting this disease was I enrolled in a clinical study. And I've been in a clinical study now for 10 years. So I'll say more about that, but that was my diagnosis, and it was hard. It wasn't a surprise, as I said, because of my family history, but it was hard nonetheless. So I just want to talk a little bit about getting a diagnosis, because I'm guessing that many of you out there are know somebody who's going through this process, maybe who's worried about their memory or worried about some of the other cognitive changes that might be occurring. And I always encourage people to go and get a diagnosis. And the reason being is, number one, you'll have a baseline. Number two, they can rule out what's not happening. And number three, if it is a dementia diagnosis, we can make plans and we can move forward and figure out what to do next. But those feelings that we have when we're diagnosed, oftentimes people will tell me, and maybe you've experienced this, regardless of what you're going in for, when the doctor calls and says, let's talk about the results. Often we feel fear or sadness or confusion. In some cases, we're embarrassed or we're ashamed or we're overwhelmed. What will we do? How can we deal with this? For some people, it's denial. It's not. We'll go see somebody else. It's not dementia. It's not Alzheimer's. And sometimes that's the person living with the disease, and sometimes it's the care partner, or sometimes it's both. Sometimes there's a lot of anger about the situation. Why is this happening to me? It's so unfair. And oftentimes there's an internalized stigma. There's a sense of shame. There's a sense of embarrassment. There's a sense that, maybe something that I did in my youth is impacting my present. I would also add to this that for some people, and for myself, in some ways, it's a relief. And I say that because I finally had an answer to what I was experiencing, why I was having so many medical memory problems. It wasn't because I was slacking off. It was because my brain was shrinking. My brain was changing. My brain was diseased. So if you can understand it from that perspective, I had answers. But all these things, we're all different how we react to bad news. But these were some of the things that I experienced, some of the things that maybe you've experienced or you know of people who have. When I talk about internalizing stigma, as I said, for many of us, this is a series of pictures that I took. The thought of having dementia or Alzheimer's is the thought of, kind of losing what I'm able to do now. We think about the losses, we think about the stigma, the shame. And we do that because that's maybe what we've been taught or how we've been influenced. Oftentimes when people talk about Alzheimer's, they picture somebody in the very end stages. They don't picture somebody in the early stages. They don't focus on what we're still able to do. That internalization focuses on the negative, on the losses. And that's where we have to start rethinking how we look at an Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis. But that's how I was feeling when I got my diagnosis. I just thought about all the things I could no longer do. Sometimes it's internal, but sometimes it's external. And sometimes when we get a dementia diagnosis, we find that people, we experience patronizing behaviors, go sit down, we'll take care of that. Stereotyping. There's a thought that we can't do the things that we once were able to do because we walked in the door with, everything was fine. We walked out the door with a diagnosis. And so now there's a stereotype that we're incapable or we're not able to do things that we once did. Oftentimes there's an isolation. People with dementia, I'm speaking for myself, we often isolate because we're embarrassed. We can't remember names. We can't remember faces. And so it's easier to avoid those situations, loud places where things are very confusing. We've experienced discrimination where people just don't accept us. Those are some of the external stigma. So we've got internal stigma and external stigma. And my goal in this presentation and in my life is to reduce the stigma. And I want us all to look at ways that we can reduce the stigma. And for those of you who are coming at this from a medical perspective, to provide factual information. If we have factual information about the nature of our disease, what's going on, if you provide us with resources and supports, that's going to help reduce the stigma. And so just having that conversation, patient and doctor or medical provider, to be able to say, okay, this is what we've got. This is how we're going to move forward in terms of providing the resources and the teams. No one should walk out the door with a piece of paper that says, see you in 6 months. Good luck, get your house in order. We want to throw away that script and replace it with a script that's more hopeful. One of the things that's really important is that words matter. And I really encourage people who are working in dementia care and just everyday people, just to choose your words carefully, because words, words can build us up or they can bring us down. Those of us who've been diagnosed with dementia, we are not demented, underscore, we're not. We're not senile, we're not deranged. We're people just who are living with dementia. Dementia is not funny. And jokes are not helpful. I can't tell you how often people have said to me when I explained that I'm a person living with dementia, that they will come back with a joke, which is just very, very disconcerting. And I've called people on it. It's not helpful. It's not funny. Oh, here I am at a band concert. I sing in a band. I'll say more about that in a minute. So I think it's really important for us as people who live with dementia, as care partners, as people who are advocates, as people who are looking for ways to help those of us who are living with dementias. One thing we can do is to promote positive images of people living well with dementia, instead of that picture of somebody kind of rocking alone in a dementia care unit that's in a lockdown unit to promote images of people like myself, people who are out and about living well. As I said, I sing in a band. I've been singing in a band actually since 1999, and I've been in the band I'm in now since 2004. And it's called Country Magic. And before the COVID, we were out singing quite a bit. And this summer we were able to be out and do some concerts in safe places. But I like to kayak. I started a kayaking club. I went to visit my friend in Alaska. We climbed glaciers. I love, undersea adventures. So promoting images of people who are living well is so important. I think we need to shift our perspective and focus on what people are still able to do. I'm still preaching. I substitute preach. I'm doing it online now. I was inducted into the New York State Country Music Hall of Honor in 2016. I take classes at Elmira College. I just finished my 40th class. I've taken everything from French to children's literature to ice skating. So as our bodies age, there's always going to be things that we aren't able to do that we once were able to do. There are going to be things that have changed in our lives where we might need to do something in a different way. So we just need to shift our perspective and focus on what people are still able to do and how we can still make a difference. I'd like to encourage us all to just advocate for those who are living with dementia and for care partners. This has become my life's work. I always say this is my ministry, the ministry that God has given me. I was selected to serve on the National Alzheimer's Council on Research, Care, and Services, and I served 2 years. Right now I'm working with the National Academy of Sciences on the decadal study, which is a study that's looking at research for the next 10 years. I'm involved in some of the summits that we've had on a local level, trying to encourage people to participate in clinical studies. The only way we're going to find a cure for Alzheimer's and some of the related dementias is if people step up and volunteer to be in studies. So that's a takeaway for all of you today, to look at what we can still do to advocate, to raise our voices. One of the things that's so important is to include us, include those of us who are living with dementia, not just Alzheimer's dementia. There's many different kinds of dementias, to include all of us, to ask us, don't talk about us without us. That is something that is so important. It's interesting that I've been in situations where there's been nobody, it's been a dementia conference and there's been nobody with dementia who's been speaking. So again, I want to thank Carol and the folks who are hosting this wonderful conference for inviting me to sit at the table. People with dementia want to be asked, don't talk about us without us. We can certainly reduce stigma. One way is through music. A couple of years ago, I guess it was almost 2 years ago, I started a group of singers, people living with dementia and care partners, and we call ourselves the Faithful Friends. And we were going to nursing homes, and hopefully we'll be back at nursing homes and other venues in the near future. But right now, that's just not possible. But again, music is a way to just enjoy each other's company and to reduce the stigma of the disease. Look for things we can do together. We can reduce stigma through the arts. I guess it was in 2 years ago that I was part of a group of folks that met at the museum. We met monthly to make an art project, and it was designed for people who are living with dementia and for care partners. And 1 week we did mask making, and you could do anything that you wanted when we were given a mask, and I ended up designing a mask because I wanted to reflect on living with dementia, living with Alzheimer's. And so I made my first mask, and I couldn't stop. I'm up to 36 masks right now. Oh, I have one for you right now. So you can see one on the wall. This one is, if you can see this mask, this is forget-me-nots. Don't ever forget us. Even though our memories fail, we don't want to be forgotten. And so reducing the stigma through the arts. My masks have been all over the country. Last summer, 10 of them went to the National Gallery of Art in Stockholm, and they were there for the Dementia 10 conference. But it's a way for us to talk about, for me, talking about what it feels like to live with dementia. I also enrolled in a little community art program, learning how to paint. And so that's just something that I discovered. But the arts are a way to reduce the stigma. I went to Mobile, Alabama last year and led a mask making workshop at one of the art galleries. And you can see some of the participants in there. And then we talked about the masks and what they meant to us, but you can see some of the masks. I wrote a book about the mask making. It's called Unmasking Alzheimer's, and it's the memories behind the mask. And it includes pictures of all my masks and a description of why I created that mask and what that mask means to me. But I wanted to take the mask off of what Alzheimer's is, the stereotypes and the stigma, and just talk about what it's like to live with this disease. We can reduce the stigma by creating meaningful connections and conversations. One of the joys last year was going to Alabama and at the invitation of my friend, Dr. Daniel Potts. He's a neurologist. Danny Potts is very active in the dementia advocacy community. He's very interested in arts and using the arts as a way to celebrate life and to bring out the joy for people who are living with dementia and for care partners. And he has a wonderful program. He has a wonderful program for students at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, where he matches up students with people who are living with dementia, and they have meaningful connections. And so again, stigma is reduced when we create meaningful connections. But to look for ways, those of us who are out and about, bringing together participants and clinicians and researchers and care partners and community and organizations, and working together so that we can reduce the stigma. And when we reduce the stigma, everybody wins. Let's see what's next. We can reduce this, or as I say, reducing stigma may increase participation in clinical trials. As I said, I have really appreciated being in an Alzheimer's clinical trial. And I go every January where they measure my brain and they do all sorts of cognitive tests. I opt in for the lumbar punctures because I think it's important that they have as much information. There's my beautiful daughter, Emily, with me. But there's lots of different studies that you can enroll in. Some are pharmacological and some are non-pharmacological. And you can learn more about that by visiting Trial Match. Also, the NIH has a wonderful website that has clinical trials by zip code. So you can search for a trial that may work for you, and you may have some right at your medical center where you are. I would like to bring my talk to a close here by having you reconsider dementia as a disability rather than a fatal disease, to think of dementia as a disability, to think about what strengths people have. Oftentimes when somebody comes in, we look at the losses or the weaknesses or what they're no longer able to do. Well, they can't do this, they can't drive, you can't work, you can't, looking at all the can'ts, looking at all the negatives. And to shift our focus and focus on strengths, on things that people still can do. I still can swim, or at least I could until the pool was closed because of COVID. But I've been swimming across the lake. There's my friend Marion, and my farthest swim, my longest swim, is 1.2 miles. And I did that to raise money for hospice. So thinking about dementia as a disability. And when we think of a disability, we make accommodations. We think about, okay, how can we make this work for this person? It may be adaptations, for example, in technology. It might be occupational therapy or speech therapy. We need to change perceptions of we have to stop thinking of dementia as in its end stages, and to think about how we can still live life well. And so if we reframe that to think about it as a disability, then what changes need to be made, or how can we help people? We can reduce stigma by making referrals. So often people will tell me, I didn't know about the Alzheimer's Association. I didn't know about Dementia Action Alliance. I didn't know there was an association for Lewy bodies. Those of us who are involved in advocacy, we need to help connect people. And those of you who are clinicians, who are social workers, who are in helping professions, help people to meet other people who are living with these diseases, so that we can learn from one another. So we reduce the stigma, we make the referrals. There's so many organizations out there that want to help. And there are other support platforms that maybe I don't have everything listed on this slide, but certainly there's others, and we can make those connections. And where are the gaps? Where are the things that are missing? That's always important to know too. So promoting dementia-friendly communities. I know San Antonio has a dementia-friendly community. For me, it's about connecting through faith communities, finding supports, and finding ways for faith communities to provide one of the things that they do best is supporting people in their journey. For those of you who are researchers, how are you managing referrals in the context of your study? And what kind of follow-up are you doing? So this brings my talk to a close, and I just want to again thank you all for the wonderful opportunity to be with you today. It's really a huge honor for me. And Carol, I don't know if you're there, but please, this is the time, I guess, that we'll ask questions.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing. So inspired by your story and for sharing it with others. We do have a number of questions. There is some personal questions which have come in to ask about the age you were diagnosed and how long you've had a diagnosis, if you would be willing to share that, Cynthia.
Sure. I was 49 years old when I started having a problem. It was 2003. I was born in 1953. I'm 66. I'm soon to be 67. But it took a long time. It took me 8 years before I had a diagnosis. And there was, one of the problems that many face is trying to get an accurate diagnosis in a timely manner. And those are kind of two things that we want to come together. Part of, at least for me, one of the challenges was that just because I wanted a test didn't mean the insurance company was going to pay for it. And then I moved and I kind of had to start the process over. It wasn't that the doctors weren't trying for me. It was just I was so young, and I was able to compensate. And so that was something else, is that people don't know the struggles I have on a day-to-day basis. I have to write everything down, and often throughout the day I have to put things I'll even put a piece of paper on the floor to remind myself where I need to go or be at a certain time. People don't see that because I can often just project an air of confidence, but meanwhile I'm frantic inside as I'm trying to remember the next thing I'm supposed to do. But yeah, I think I answered that question.
I'm muted still. Another question, people wanted to talk, to hear from you a little bit more about your involvement in clinical trials. What's motivated you to do that, and you talked about the longitudinal study you're in. Are there other trials or other research studies you've been involved in related to Alzheimer's?
I've been in several short-term studies, but I had to be careful. The one that I'm in, which is called ADNI, Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Study, it is a longitudinal study, and it's an observational study. So in other words, I don't take any medicines. They just are watching the progress of the disease. And I go once a year for cognitive tests, and I also go for the medical tests. So every year it's prescribed. It might be an MRI, a PET scan, and a lumbar puncture. And I do it over several days. There are other friends of mine who are involved in medicinal studies, pharmacological studies, if you will, where they go and they get an infusion, or they take a pill. And those studies are ongoing. And so I urge people, I found out about my study by calling the Alzheimer's Association trial match, which matches people who are interested in participating with a study in their area. You know, they ask you some questions, everything's confidential. And I called the gal that matched me 10 years ago at my last visit, and I thanked her for matching me with that study, because it really has changed my life. It gives me a way to fight against this disease. And so I encourage people, the only way we're going to have a cure, a treatment, is if people step up. And people will sometimes say to me, oh, but Cynthia, I don't have Alzheimer's disease, so they don't want me. Oh, no, nothing could be farther from the truth. You see, the studies need control people, and they need people who are experiencing cognitive challenges and changes. And so it's important, and also to encourage people from the underserved populations. You know, we need to make sure that our studies have a good representation across cultures and races, that we can understand how the disease progresses, and how different interventions may work with different populations. It's critical.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I have a question that has to do what you were talking about, what you can do and the number of things you continue to do and be involved in. Can you just talk a little bit about, as the dementia progresses, and I suspect you've been interacting with people that have are further along in the course of their condition than you. What are things that we can still do as a community to make sure that we involve people in our community that may be having more deficit than you have at this point? Although, as you pointed out, you make it look easy.
And it's not easy, that's for sure. I think one thing is that I've noticed, especially, this has been on my heart, and it's connected, is especially during this pandemic, is so many of the programs that support people with dementia and that support caregivers have had to stop. You know, respite care in congregate settings, meals, things like our trips to the museums, art programs, that's all stopped. And so one of my challenges that I throw out on a regular basis is, how can we as a community, what can we do? And especially with the gap in people's ability to connect virtually. Not everybody can get on the computer. Not everybody has one or has internet. So it's not realistic, but what can we do? Can we have drive-by celebrations? Can we kind of think outside the box to include people who are living with dementia and care partners? Care partners are feeling isolated and lonely too. The days are very long when you have nothing to break up the day. So this is an especially challenging time. But you know, looking at what people still can do, how they can still stay involved in programs, whether it's volunteering at a food pantry or helping at a church service or synagogue service, handing out bulletins, involving people. If you feel like that you're making a difference, it's so good for our hearts, it's so good for our souls.
Thank you so much for talking about stigma. There's a comment that says, thank you, Dr. Hummel, for your speaking out for persons affected by dementia. The stigma is so real and your voice is so needed. I want to just go a little bit further into stigma and ask you about that, Cynthia. When Sarah and I were on the call with you, I loved what you said, and I think I've been repeating it many times, that intelligence and memory are not in the same buckets, and I think that's part of the stigma. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, when I got the results of my cognitive test, my last round, and I'd always been like a straight A student. I'd always been at the high end of the bell-shaped curve, and here I was. Some of my scores were like 2%, 1% in terms of what my ability to recall in different domains, and I wanted to just rip up my diploma. I didn't feel worthy of it. I used to be able to read. I can't read books anymore. People say, and I could do a book a night, and I could compare the book to the movie. I can't do that anymore. And I was looking at that, my intelligence or the things that I used to be able to juggle with ease, and then comparing myself, focusing on the losses. And so for me, a lot of that stigma was internalized. But I did run into it from external sources. I was at an event, and there was some discussion on whether or not I should be allowed to stay because I didn't have a care partner with me. That sense that here's Cynthia and she's by herself, and where's her care partner? That I couldn't navigate that situation alone. I'd driven there to this picnic, and it was just a distressing situation for me. I was invited to speak at an event, and I wrote out my speech and I sent it to the organizers, and they said, we'll have the DJ read it. And I said, oh no, it's my speech. If the DJ wants to speak, he'll have to write his own. But that sense that I was incapable. And I think we've got to fight against those stereotypes and that stigma, but by promoting positive images of people living well. One of the things I love about being a member of Dementia Action Alliance, DAA, is that we look at people who are living well with dementia and what we're still able to do, not focusing on the things that maybe we need help on, although, that's still there, but focusing on what we still can do and how we can still make a difference.
Thank you. There's another question, Dr. Hummel. Do you know any word games, crosswords, Sudoku, etc., and do you play them, and have you found them helpful?
Yes, I do. I love doing the word searches. I do almost everything right on my phone. Every day I do the little mini crossword puzzle from the New York Times. It's like 5 letters across and 5 letters down. I always feel so smart when I do that. That's kind of fun. There's all kinds of word games. I think it's really important to stay engaged and to find those activities that kind of make us work a little harder. One of the classes I took at Elmira College was French. I took 2 years of French, and I did that because I had taken it in elementary school and high school, and I figured it was still in my brain somewhere, and so it was fun to revisit that and kind of make my brain work. I always think if we can bring up our cognitive reserve by maybe learning something new, by challenging ourselves, pushing ourselves. Puzzles are fun. I like to do actual jigsaw puzzles as well. The most I've done is I guess I've done a 500-piece puzzle. Most of the ones I do are 300-piece. They're wonderful activities on a cold winter day, but it makes my brain work. And I listen to music, I sing. I'm thinking about other things like word searches, anything that we do to kind of keep ourselves going.
Great, thank you. And that leads actually to another question, Cynthia. But realistically speaking, if you're having problems with directions, what are the tricks and the logistics you use to get to where you need to get to?
I am so grateful to my Siri. I better not say her name, she might answer me. Yeah. But she tells me exactly where to go. And I have some safety nets if I'm going a distance, like if I'm traveling to give a talk, for example, although that's not happening right now, to get the written directions too. So in case I lose that internet, I have a way to get to where I need to go. And I let my host know what time I'm leaving and what time they should expect me. I've got AAA, I've got all kinds of safety nets in place for that. But at some point, And I've had this conversation. At some point, it won't be safe for me to drive. And so when I moved to the place I live right now in Elmira, I live on a bus line. So I can still get around. There's Uber, there's Lyft. At some points, they won't be things that I'll be able to do. But I can't focus on those things right now. I'm trying to stay as active and as involved as I can. And that makes my day, it brings me great joy.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. I think we have time for at least another question. James Butler is the chaplain who sits on our community advisory board, and you'll hear from him in a few minutes. But he's, because you're a minister, James has asked about, did you have a spiritual struggle when you had the diagnosis, and how your faith has helped you in this?
Oh my goodness, James, that's such a great question, because I was so ticked off at God. I was so mad. It just felt so unfair, because here I dedicated my life to my ministry, and I just felt like the rug was being pulled out. I really struggled. And there was a woman in my church, her name was Bertie, and she said to me, Pastor Cynthia, God is just scraping your plate so that he can use you for something else. And I thought, really? I mean, that was not, but I had to work really hard. My mom was a person of faith, and we were raised as people of faith, and she always reminded us that everybody has problems in life. No one ever promised you a rose garden. That, but no matter what, that we were never alone, that God was always with us. And so I just had to actually start living what I was preaching, and that was hard for me, because I just felt like I went through the dark night of the soul. I was just devastated. But I just realized that out of this diagnosis, God has given me many, many blessings. And one of the blessings is that this Alzheimer's has become my ministry. And I've learned so much from people who I've walked with and cried with and learned from. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so that gives me a sense of peace, knowing that I'm following God's will for my life by answering this call.
Cynthia, thank you so much. And I think I'm going to end with a comment that's in the question box. I think it really sums up what we've all been feeling from hearing your inspirational talk today. Thank you so much. It's from Sandy, and she says, thank you for your honest comments about the impact that dementia has had on your life and sense of self. I work with people living with dementia, and I find it successful to help them to identify the things, and in capital letters, they can do. Sometimes people have a restricted sense of self-worth only related to their life's job or perhaps other things, and helping them to discover their other talents can become very important to their sense of self-worth. And I think you've really given us that vision today of how we can support, how it's the role of our community, and to deal with stigma, to help people get earlier diagnosis, and then to be able to support what they can do. And we know there's many things they can't do, but how can we support what they can do? And remember, exactly. I'm going to end with, remember that memory and intelligence are in separate buckets. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you very, very much.